go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 3-year Outlook meeting. My name is Sonia Forster and I'm the Seattle District Manager at AGC of Washington, and I oversee our liaison with federal facilities for our chapter. And thank you everyone who logged into the meeting early for our meet and greet networking. We are trying to find every little opportunity to get you together face to face with people that you don't know. So we have a full 3-hour agenda. Stacey, if we can move to that slide. A full 3-hour agenda, and we'll go over that in a few minutes, but I wanted to first go over some of the ground rules for the meeting. As we do our best to make the most of the virtual meetings, please try to turn on your cameras as often as you're able. We understand that you may not be able to do that all the time, but as much as you are, so that we can see your face and gauge engagement, and so that you can ask questions of the presenters. And please keep your microphones muted if you're not asking a question to eliminate background noise. We will have a Q&A after almost all of the agenda items, so be sure to take this at that time. You can ask your questions by either typing into the chat box. You can even type those questions in early or raise your hand during the Q&A period. For your convenience, we'll share all the meeting materials in the chat box as the agenda items come up. This includes PowerPoint slides, project handouts, and other supporting materials. And lastly, we're recording this meeting and we'll distribute that video to attendees early next week. It takes a few days for those to get prepared, along with copies of all the handouts that were provided today. So before we get started, I'd like to give you a little overview of today's agenda. You'll find a copy of the agenda in the chat box. Hopefully it's in there. Please let me know if you do not see it. I think it's sending now. We'll start off with a 2020 federal update and move to a presentation by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on utilizing the whole building design guide website. We'll have a federal review of COVID-19 guidance, and after our federal facilities present their 3-year project outlooks, we'll finish up with our 2020 federal project highlight featuring a finished Mud Mountain Dam and a look ahead to the 2020 Bangor P824 project. Before we get started with our update from Washington, D.C., I'd like to take a minute to highlight AGC's new coordination committee that was started almost a year ago with the Department of Defense. The meeting is quarterly and open to all AGC members. You're encouraged to attend, and here to give you a little brief overview of this collaborative effort is Jeff Arvizo, Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer at Mountain Construction. Jeff is a regular attendee and an active contributor to our DoD partnership. Jeff, can I hand it over to you?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, as Sonia mentioned, in addition to this federal facilities meeting that is held every year, AGC and DoD members that are here with us today also have assembled this working group that we call, as Sonia mentioned, the AGC DoD Coordination Group. It was initiated in July of last year with Phil Wallace, myself, Sonia, Justin Nodolf, Mark Snell, and Mark Slominski with the federal agencies. And similar to other AGC best practices committees that have already been formed, such as WashShot, Sound Transit, and the Port of Seattle, this DoD group meets several times a year, generally quarterly, and the purpose is to dive deeper into and tackle relevant federal contracting topics. We communicate and provide feedback. This is both directions, so that we can get feedback from each side and see, what's working well and what maybe needs some other input from both sides. We share and discuss new developments of any type that may surface. And overall, we attempting here to really collaborate and maintain positive relationships between the agencies and the contractors. To give you a flavor of some of the things that we've been talking about recently includes stuff like beta SAM, issues that may be related to that. The whole building design guide, WBDG, and Mark Slominski is going to share more of that with us today. We've talked about COVID and other EHS related topics. We go through as it comes up, anything with the FAR, general conditions, technical specs, effective scheduling, just to name a few. And as you see here on the slide, our next meeting here is November 13th, Friday the 13th. We're starting at 10 o'clock. And similar to this event, it'll be held virtually. And interested persons, please email Sonia.
Thanks, Jeff. So like Jeff said, if this meeting isn't already on your calendar, please email me and I will send you an invitation. Now we'll turn to our next agenda item, is our 2020 federal update presented from Washington, D.C. by Jordan Howard, the director of the Federal and Heavy Construction Division at the Associated General Contractors of America. Jordan received his JD from the Antonin Scalia Law School of Law at George Mason University and earned his BA in English and Political Science from Texas Tech University. He's licensed to practice law in the state of Maryland. Thank you for joining us once again for our federal 3-year Outlook meeting. Please take it away, Jordan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. And just really pleased to be here. This is one of my favorite meetings. I understand we have to do it virtually this year. And Sonia, I understand how challenging it can be to put together virtual conferences. It sounds easy on the outside, but having done them, they can be quite challenging. But I am pleased to see all the attendance here. That's really encouraging. And for everyone listening, AGC of Washington is just such a great chapter when it comes to dealing with issues surrounding the federal government and agencies and the impacts for federal contractors. It's always been really impressive. And Jeff, just what you're talking about, the DoD committee, I highly recommend. I sat in a session or two there, and it's been very effective. So I am Jordan, head of our federal division and AGC of America here in DC. And as they say, may you live in interesting times. It is certainly interesting times here. So I will go a little forward. So just a brief overview of the topics that I will be covering. I normally save the election portion towards the end, but as it's front and center and clearly impacting everything, even more so politics, I figured we briefly discuss that. Then I'll just do a sort of a brief review and outlook of 2020. It's been a whirlwind year, just to say the least. And then I'll do a little bit of regulations and legislations, which I think will be the substantive and meat portion of this presentation. Okay, so 2016 presidential election. You guys have probably seen this map before. So this is what it looked like. President Trump won by 306 electoral votes, beating Hillary Clinton. So interesting thing here is, while the polls clearly were sort of all over the place, the average for Hillary was actually 2% and beating President Trump. And if you looked at the total population count, it ended up being 2%. The only thing that sort of swayed this is the Electoral College. So if you divvy up that 2% a certain way, you get this landslide victory. So what do the polls look like today? So this is probably the most recent conglomeration of all the polls. This is an average. Clearly, Joe Biden seems to be pulling ahead on even traditional states that Republicans have long carried. You can look at North Carolina and Georgia. There was a poll by the Quinnipiac that just came out and sort of reaffirmed that it does look like Biden's pulling away even in North Carolina and Georgia. And if that's the case, that could be a sort of a real issue. We had the great Frank Lutz come and speak to one of our events recently, and he said that he expected the final results to not be announced Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, but maybe Friday or Saturday. But if we start to see sort of this landslide victory, we might know ahead, with the caveat that the polls were wrong and sort of all over the place. And that, again, there's a lot of unknowns, but this is the average. So what do we have to say about probably the second most important election, the Senate race. So this is the current composition of the U.S. Senate as it stands, 53-47, and you can kind of see how it's divvied up. But look at the average of the polls as they go forward here. It's striking, right? So it's a slim majority. It's slim flip for the Democrats, 51. It's interesting enough that if there's just one of these races, if this map holds true, but except for one race, you'd have a 50-50 split. Then again, it would matter who the president and the vice president is, as the vice president can break a tie. And if anyone, I won't ask anyone when's the last time we've had a 50-50 Senate, but I did a little research, and it was just 2001, so roughly 20 years ago. There were some events in 2001 that definitely may have not had the partisan fights that we would see today. But if there is a split like this, you might see the vice president a much bigger role than at any point in modern time. So we think there's two likely electoral scenarios. So you can either have sort of a sweep, a blue wave as it's called. The president has its coattails and can do a big influence, and that's certainly what the polls seem to be trending. So we have Joe Biden becoming president, the Senate flipping, the House staying, and then you start getting into a lot of the additional rules. And if the Senate changes some of its rules, it would make it, the landscape will definitely be much different. But it is an election year, and sometimes the rhetoric gets out, and I wonder how much some of these massive changes would affect the Senate. But certainly there's strong political pressure, at least among the Democrats, to end the filibuster, and you might see the Senate look pretty much like a second House of Representatives. The other likely scenario is really just the status quo, and we've all been living through that. We can picture how that would be in a second term. Unlikely scenarios: Biden presidency, Republicans keep the Senate, and the Democrats keep the House. So again, then you can see that the presidential effect on these races. And then the very unlikely scenario is sort of the House flips and everything's Republican. I don't think I've ever seen a poll in the last couple of years, frankly, that would support that. So really, it's all or nothing for the blue wave or the status quo. That's what we can expect. I didn't want to spend too much time on Joe Biden's proposals. A lot of times that these candidates have a number of proposals, and as this audience knows, who's very sophisticated, just wanted to point out that the infrastructure proposed package was 1.6 trillion. So we keep hearing this 1 trillion plus number in infrastructure investment. So we do a little recap of 2020. This was an unusually busy year. I don't know how much we got from it, but there was a lot of work done on infrastructure. In January, the Democrats released sort of their big, bold version of an infrastructure package. It's called Moving Forward Framework. In March, Congress passed the CARES Act. Not a whole lot of money for infrastructure and the CARES Act, and I will talk about the CARES Act a little bit later as it refers to federal contractors, because federal contractors did get an important section in that bill. In May, the Senate unveiled its bipartisan water infrastructure bills, basically WARDA, and then that was marked up and approved pretty quickly. And then June, the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction for a lot of these big infrastructure packages, started working on their highway and transit bill as well. This was somewhat hijacked with a number of messaging bills that unfortunately has caused the Surface Reauthorization Act to stall. It's currently under a bid extension right now. It's a 5-year program that funds highways, but this was, again, another issue. And then another in July, you can see another infrastructure bill. The sort of theme, there has been extreme partisanship in Washington, D.C. on a topic that shouldn't be partisan. Infrastructure is bipartisan. It's something that can easily be worked through, and you can see how this, the effect of the presidential election has definitely creeped in. So in July was pretty busy as well. So a lot of water resources development act movement. House moved pretty quickly in a strikingly bipartisan fashion. This is frankly in keeping with the way that these water resources bills, the bills that fund or authorize the projects that the Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works does. They've been doing it every 2 years since 2014, and it's something that, frankly, Congress has been proud of. The T&I committee is proud of. Interesting enough, the highway reauthorization bill and the WARDA were done basically at the same time, and it was interesting seeing those hearings. The highway was it's so partisan, and then a day or two later they did WARDA, and even the legislators were relishing in the fact that they could do something that was bipartisan without issue. So, and then in September, more surface. This has gotten extended for the length of the CR, which is December 12th. So going back to the candidates a little bit, if there is an infrastructure outlook for 2021, this is likely the way it's going to play out. You could see President Trump, we've seen from sort of the history of the efforts, was an emphasis on urban and rural infrastructure needs, climate change to some degree, resiliency, definitely accelerating project delivery has been a big part of it, especially with cutting regulations and speeding up these projects, and then investment in new technologies. For President Biden, and if there is a Democratic-controlled Senate and House, you can kind of expect to see sort of an emphasis on fix it first. I mean, this is what we saw during Obama's tenure, where it was basically put as much money as you can on projects that can be done right now. The jury's out on if that is as effective, or these infrastructure projects can kind of be turned on like a light switch. But there is significant infrastructure needs, so it is possible. Locally driven project decisions, as far as sort of more environmental regulations. So you see like a little bit of juxtaposition of trying to get these projects done quickly with a greater emphasis on sort of environmental protections and frankly the regulations that have been rolled back. So Congressional Review Act. So this was a sort of a wonky policy that was not well known until President Trump took over, and the House and Senate were Republican. This is an act that says basically they can repeal any agency decision with some parameters for the previous 6 months. So 6 months before the new year, it's everything's fair game. And this was widely used. There was a blacklisting rule that was under President Obama that was highly disruptive to the industry and frankly not supported by a lot of the agencies that I've spoken to. And that was one of the first acts that was repealed. Continued efforts to roll back regulations and expedite projects, and then as well as some of these issues, nationwide permits for the Corps, PFAS action. So these are these forever chemicals that I'm sure you've heard of, and if not, you will. And then some environmental and some more environmental issues. If Vice President Biden becomes president, we can expect a rollback of all the significant deregulation efforts that we've seen these past 4 years, and frankly, that's, it's going to be sort of the pendulum will shift back yet again pretty significantly, and that will be a major issue. So it's interesting to think, well, if we do get this 1.6 trillion from Vice President Biden, if he becomes president, but there is significant regulatory reenactment or even expansion, does that diminish sort of the efforts that funding would get? So lame duck Congress. So we basically are going to be in it as soon as the election's over. A lot of people say that nothing gets done in a lame duck. I think a lot of things get done, and that's typically when Congress finally funds the government. That's when they typically get the National Defense Authorization Act. This year they're gonna get more done in that time frame as well, as expected. Frankly, the committees on both the House and Senate that they were going to be able to address this important legislation prior to the election, and that got pushed back. So there's going to be a this time frame, and it's probably going to go on a little bit longer than December 11th, but it's a whirlwind of important legislation. So a little bit about the Water Resources Development Act. So the House has done its job. It's passed. It's a bipartisan bill. It's a good bill. The Senate as well has passed it in committee, but they have yet to vote on it on the floor. It is also another bipartisan bill, which is great to see. Interesting enough, since the Senate hasn't passed it on the floor, it's actually made negotiation kind of a little more tricky. We're seeing committee staff having to check with individual senators on basic things where they just had a vote. That would have been something to go on. So there's some numbers here: 34 projects, the most projects, and I think it's increased since last time I checked. Most projects in the chief's reports of any WARDA, which is great. Lieutenant General Semi went on a spree of signing these projects. He wanted to get them done. They need to get done. So we're very pleased to see that. And it's been it's an important bill, and I think I personally think it's going to get done November or December. This is an authorization bill. There's not a lot of risk out there, and it's bipartisan. One of the main issues, and I'm going to keep moving for sort of time's sake, but they did change the cost share in both bills for the Inland Waterway Trust Fund. It used to be 50-50, and now the federal is going to take 65%, and that's going to be a big relief. Potentially unleashing another $1 billion, but it's definitely a relief for local non-federal sponsors who've been impacted by this, and as well as Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. They finally are getting this more off budget. Congress does have a habit of making a trust fund, saying that they're not going to touch it, and then immediately starts messing around with the money, and the funding doesn't come out as much as is put in. There's an interesting new Buy American requirement in there that made in the House. I'm not sure that's going to make it into the final bill, but basically it would require domestic aluminum on all Army Corps civil projects. If so, that would likely increase the cost significantly. But I'm pretty confident that that's not going to make it into the final version. Maybe a very slimmed down version of it. NDAA, it's passed for 60 years. It's going to pass again. The only question is whether or not it gets done before the end of the calendar year. It's not uncommon for it to slip past a little bit, but I thought this was for your own reference, and I didn't put the links to the bills up there, but they're easy to find. It's something that so a few sections that I thought I could share with you that I'm watching that I think are interesting and could be impactful. One in the House section, there's a provision that basically will require agencies to pay 50% up front for any interim directed change order for small businesses. It's not going to impact a huge portions. Most Most REAs aren't directed, but it's something to watch out for, and it would impact small businesses. This next section, Section 841, modifications to supervision award of certain contracts. This one's interesting. So this would actually change how military construction has been procured throughout the history of frankly, in the last 20th century. It would require, first it would give a local preference to any company who's doing military construction, so it would be an in-state preference. A second provision, which is probably more disruptive than that, is it would require local licensing. So, you know, if you have a subcontractor who comes in, say flies in and does your paint work on military installations or whatever project, they would actually need to be licensed in the state. So it would definitely slow down, especially among the subcontractor community, who can work where, and it would definitely increase the cost. And I know DOD is watching this one, and you know, it's not something that they're sort of pleased with. This next section, 848, this would basically require the federal government to blacklist any company that's quote unquote had repeated violations of the FLSA. You know, this was another issue that there was already a debarment process implemented, and it's just an easier way to blacklist companies that are trying to do work for the federal government. We think that it's misguided, and there is already a process in place. This is a little bit like that Fair Play, Safe Workplaces Act that I mentioned earlier that had the CRA. This next one, there we go, my Marco Rubio moment. So this next one would just list all the contracts, subcontracts, and anything related to the border wall. Whether you agree or disagree with the border wall, it's, I think, immaterial to this point. It's sort of a name and shame aspect to federal contracting. Definitely would give sort of a lot of, I don't know, it's basically just fodder to harass companies. This next one, 846, would repeal a pilot program, which basically is just like a pay-to-play loser pay system. If you know, you bid protest and you lost, you would have to pay the government's fees. I think that's sort of double dipping and bad faith. And this next one's interesting. So in 2020 NDA, there was a provision that passed that said all military construction contracts had to require the companies to do 20% of apprenticeship programs. So your workforce would have to be composed of 20% of folks that were enrolled in apprenticeship programs. That didn't make a lot of sense. Construction's not included, and a lot of sort of like the DOLs sort of, it's difficult, and it doesn't really make, it wasn't really clear how that was going to get implemented. So the Senate repeals this section, which is pretty rare. Usually there's not a, the NDA doesn't go back and forth year after year repealing, it just passed. In the House section, it actually keeps that. So you're going to see kind of that fight. And it'll be interesting to see once there's if there is a switch in power in Washington, whether or not that that rule goes into effect. So I'm going to kind of go quickly because I know I'm going a little bit over time, but so COVID-19 response. So by and large, the federal agencies seem to have adapted pretty well to some of the restrictions. There have been, there wasn't a really coordinated response, but you had some agencies that really stepped up to the plate and try to get projects moving. Luckily, there was no shutdown on pretty much any significant base, and so it's it was refreshing to see when there was a crisis that a lot of these agencies stepped up and open communication and did sort of the right thing when it came to getting these projects moving along. So Section 3610, I'm going to talk about a little bit. So this was a provision that benefited federal contractors. There wasn't any money originally to it, but it has since gotten some funding, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then some cybersecurity issues that are going to impact your business. The aptly named Section 889, and then cybersecurity maturity model certification. So what is 3610 of the CARES Act? So basically this would give federal contractors any sort of paid leave if their employees weren't able to access a federal facility. So you can imagine, say a base commander said, hey, if you had any employees that went to, out of the country, say like Mexico or Canada for a vacation, they have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. Well, you could actually use this provision to say, all right, well, I can't bring them on the base, but I still have to pay them. You can actually apply, and the contracting officer should grant sort of this paid sick leave, so to speak. This was a provision that we lobbied hard to get in. Originally, we wanted a REA for any delay whatsoever. That got whittled down significantly, and then it basically was, hey, if you can't access the federal facility, there'll be some sort of compensation. There was, Congress originally had this, expiring at September 30th. Well, the rules, frankly, weren't clear enough. It took DOD really and OMB quite a while to kind of list how they were going to do this and show how contractors could apply for this. So they've extended it to December 11th. It's still out there. It is retroactive. If you've had an incident like this, you can apply. I put a hyperlink there as a memo on this, so it'll kind of walk you through and answer some questions. But they have extended this to December 11th with the CR, and there is support among Congress to extend this even further. So Section 889A1B. All right, it's a mouthful, right? And it's, as federal contractors, we're starting to have to get more adapt to these cybersecurity rules and restrictions. It's here. It's not going to go away. Unfortunately, there's just been too many issues, and the federal government has made this a priority for the last couple of years, and it seems to be getting more strict. So this refers to a provision that was in the FY 2019 NDAA. It's in effect right now. And so what it does is it prohibits the federal government from entering into any company that uses, these Chinese telecommunications. They call it either, you can think of like Huawei or ZTE. The issue with that is that there's a number of Huawei and ZTE subsidies. It's if you ask me what was in my smartphone, I couldn't tell you. So it's pretty tough to ask if contractors are using this. You might see this in sort of a new change order, or you're updating your profile on beta.sam. But it's here. You're going to have to basically say in good faith, we're not using these systems. It is tough. I heard of one story from a contractor who was using sort of these temperature checks for their employees, and they found out that those temperature gauges actually had Huawei technology in it. And so you had this kind of interesting dynamic where they had to stop using at least those type of temperature checks. And so this interesting dynamic between COVID and sort of protection from using these systems. There's a lot of confusion. No one really knows how to enforce it. No one knows some key definitions. They put out the rule pretty late, and it was basically effect within 30 days that they put out the rule. It's a good faith standard. I will say if you do say that you use this technology, you'll be blacklisted. So I do, I guess, my due diligence to show that how you're not using it if in fact you're not. Cybersecurity maturity model certification. So you've heard me talk about this previously. It's the new basically certification. If you're a DoD contractor, you're going to have to be certified. CMC levels 1 through 5. This was supposed to be rolled out earlier this year because of some internal issues and COVID-related delays. It's just been delayed this year. They recently put out the DFARS. If I have a link here, I don't think I have a link here, but they recently put out the regulatory rule. And so once it goes into effect in November 30th, we've been told that's when these third-party certifiers that are aptly known as C3PAOs will begin to certify contractors. So a little bit of ray of hope or positivity in this is that they're not expected to start with construction at the beginning. They're going to start with sort of the upper level. You can kind of think of like nuclear power plants or missile silos, and like sort of the Raytheons and Boeings and things like that first. They're going to roll it out over the next 5 years, which is much better than the initial where they were going to just do everyone in the middle of the summer, and somehow that was going to not cause chaos. But it is going to be rolled out in the next 5 years. It is coming. So one thing that DoD recently said was that the PMs are expected to set the level of the CMC requirements, so the certification level. So the PMs will really be sort of the gatekeepers on this. I've communicated with the headquarters of most of the major procurement agencies and to let them know that, and to issue guidance and try to get some clarity on that, because we don't think everything needs to just go to level 4 and 5 if it's not, or even 3 if it's not a significant issue. So here's a little bit of resources if you want to check them out. I would recommend the CMC accreditation body. Go to that website and sign up for their emails. They also have resources on compliance. It's a nonprofit that the DoD has sort of outsourced to create the standard. I find that they've been pretty open and frankly, their email alerts are good and pretty timely as well. So that's where you would go, and frankly, like, everyone's still learning how to do this as well, but it shouldn't be. If you meet some basic safeguard requirements, it shouldn't be a heavy lift. And with that, I know I'm a little over time, but I'll take any questions. I will mention one last thing. Jeff mentioned beta.sam that they've talked to DoD, and so GSA is the agency that's responsible for that. And I know Jeff and Sonia were on the calls, but AGC of Washington has made it clear that this has been a priority, and that there's been a lot of issues with users trying to navigate this frankly broken website. We've taken those concerns to GSA headquarters. We've had several meetings. In fact, we just had a meeting with the entire acquisition team a week or two ago, and they get it now. I think, frankly, it wasn't really understood how difficult the situation had become and the website's effectiveness and sort of the impact on the government. So I'll give credit to AGC of Washington for their diligent work on this, but we are raising it to the appropriate people, and there does seem to be a recognition that this needs to be fixed immediately.
Do we have any questions for Jordan? We can take one. All right. Thank you very much, Jordan. Really appreciate you coming on. with that update. Up next, we have a presentation for utilizing the whole building design guide website. During this presentation, you'll be viewing web pages from wbdg.org. We will put those web addresses in the chat box if you would like to view them on your own browser. And here to walk through the ins and outs of WBDG is Mark Slominski. Mark is Chief Construction Division of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Seattle District. He served in this position since December 2015. Mark provides leadership, management, and support staff of approximately 100, administering $200 to $400 million in construction contracts annually across the Seattle district boundaries. Mark Slominski has more than 11 years of experience with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, supporting construction missions as a project engineer, resident engineer, area engineer, and construction support branch chief prior to his service as division chief. We're lucky to have him here supporting our program today, as well as staffing our DoD Coordination Committee. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thanks, Sonia. So doing a quick comm check, see how it's coming through.
Sounds good.
Great. You always get the chance to realize how outdated your bio is and someone reads it out in public. So actually about 15 years in county of experience with USACE. Prior to that was an Air Force civil servant. Prior to that worked in the architect engineering realm for a few years, and that gave me a great appreciation for what the private sector gets to go through in terms of designing and constructing, and gives you some empathy when you come over to the federal sector. So appreciate that opportunity. So so for WBDG, we had a chance to go over this with the coordination committee a few months ago, and it was well received. And so the request was, hey, let's roll it out to the larger audience here in this meeting today. And I'll be keeping an eye on what's in the chat box as well to see if there's any questions that come up as we go through. But the intent was to kind of do a live fly, and as Sonia mentioned, and Stacy can help us with it. We start off with just this title slide that gets you to the website, and that is wbdg.org. So it's interesting that it's not a CAC enabled, it's not a federal site, it's a .org site, and so that's the first helpful recognition for everyone out there, is that you don't have to have any kind of kabuki dance to get a federal website access to get to this. So if I heard over the years pros and cons of working with the federal government. One of the cons tends to be, man, y'all stack a bunch of stuff in the specs that seems like a giant gotcha drill. There's reference after reference and standards, and it seems like at the end of the day, it's very difficult to get to a situation where there's clarity of what the standards and guidance are. I would say that the DoD has done a phenomenal job, and it's actually broader than DoD in developing this product here. And so what has happened is that not only is there one platform that hosts this huge amount of information, but it also is now organized in a way that we'll walk through and show you to where it's DoD wide. And so you're no longer having to deal necessarily with individual specifications or standards across the services. It's been incorporated into a DoD set of standards. So the first thing that Stacy was able to pull up is what the site looks like when you click on the middle and you hit federal facility criteria. If you stay on this page for a moment, what I'd like to do is just orient you to all the things that are down below. So these are all the agencies and organizations that have subscribed to WBDG. And I'll kind of do this as a what if drill, as if we're doing a real exercise. So to kick off, let's say that there's an opportunity out there for a design build acquisition that your company is interested in pursuing, and it's for a federal agency that's listed here. So that's a good indicator that the information you need relative to codes and standards and guidance is going to be posted at this location. Before we get too far into any of these individual ones, just take a read and see who's listed. So as I mentioned, it's bigger than DoD. It's actually quite expansive across the federal enterprise for different applications you may be responding to as a designer or constructor. So we'll do most of our focus on the first one, but before we go there, if you click on the one that says Army COE, I want to show you what these individual services are showing. So I started off a minute ago saying you don't really have to worry about these individual service standards anymore. That's true from the standpoint of specifications and unified facility criteria. However, there are still a number of things that are out there that may be referenced over to a specific acquisition or type of customer you're working for. So if you scroll down slightly on this page, you'll see what types of information is listed for the Army Corps of Engineers. And it's going to have some things that are specific, such as technical manuals. It'll have the mill handbooks and other resources that could be relative to specific acquisitions or project needs. If you go back one page, I can show you, for example, what NAVFAC has listed there. So the next one down below, Army Corps of Engineers. Similar in that when you scroll down on the NAVFAC page, you will see the types of information that the Navy Facility Command has got listed there. And one more back, and then we'll show you the Air Force one for AFCEC. And scroll down. And so here's where you might find ETLs and other types of references that are specific to Air Force equities. So keep an eye on the chat to see if there's any questions yet. All right, if not, we'll go back, and now let's click on the one that says Department of Defense. And voila, we will open up, if you go to the very top there. It's interesting, it's not alphabetical. So left top, there it is. So this is the place that I would recommend people get familiar with if you're going to do work with the Department of Defense. And so as you look here, you'll see that there's quite a large amount of information available. And so if we'll start scroll slightly up a little bit, and we'll start with what's listed here for Unified Facilities Guide Specifications and Unified Facility Criteria. So those are two that are very important to look at. And if you go back one, we'll start with the UFCs just to get oriented to those. So UFC. All right. Looks like there's a good question here that Mark Janewski has listed relative to specs intact. We'll touch on that when we get into the UFGS, and then we'll see if I answer the question. If not, then we'll dive deeper into that question. So let me orient you to the UFCs briefly, and scroll up slightly so we can see, there we go, so we can see some of the pull down menus. So one of the first questions that I had when I worked for a design firm was, what code am I designing to? It seems pretty important to know based on jurisdictions and locations. So the first UFC, if you were to get oriented to, that's worth reviewing, and we'll open this up. If you go to the top one, that's called the 1-200-01 building code. You can click there. And what you'll see is it gives you a brief description of it. It gives you the date that it came out. So this particular one is fairly new, 10/1 of 2020 for the change and revision date. It gives you kind of a status, it's active, and this is what the summary is. And then it gives you a location down below that shows you the length of the product, 77 pages, the PDF version. And then before we click on PDF, let's look just below that. There's something called CCR with a pencil. And so this is the location where if an industry partner notices that there's something that seems amiss or a suggested change, you can actually click on the CCR, and that will generate kind of a help ticket that you can submit the recommended change. And then there's an entire group that is given ownership of individual UFCs that would receive that suggested change, and they have a battle rhythm of going through the CCRs and either accepting, adopting, or modifying the UFCs. So let's go to the PDF, and we will open this up. And let's scroll down a little bit, a couple pages here, just to orient you to what a typical UFC looks like. It'll have the change information on this page. Keep scrolling down. You'll notice on this page it's very valuable because it shows that all the services that contributed to the USCF have actually signed off on it. Keep going a little bit further. And now you get into the information that's listed there. So this being the overarching UFC is pretty important because it's going to tell you what code do you follow, who is the AHJ, who are those organizations that have a decision authority. And if you keep going down a little bit, I'll get you to a page that touches on that. All right, keep going. This is background applicability. Each UFC has a typical layout similar to that. This is an interesting section that it goes through and starts to tell you how the UFCs are laid out by section, and we'll touch on that more in just a moment, but this is one location where it's got a good description of it. And authorities, yep, keep going. Let's look at this one real quick. So if you go slightly up there, it's going to talk about building official authority having jurisdiction. No doubt a question that's of interest to people because there's topics that come up on projects that may require some sort of deciding official. And so this gives some guidance as to who that is. And within the DoD, they've actually assigned to individual services a responsibility to be the AHJ for different functions. And that is the organization that it would roll up to in terms of having a decision authority, be it a fire protection issue or a mechanical issue or items of that nature. And let's go, and on that page, before we get too far, one more thing I wanted to show you that's really important. And so the key question to start off with is, what code are we using? Well, there it is. So the DoD facilities are built to the International Building Code. And so it just states to utilize the 2018 IBC and IEBC. So we won't go too much further into this one. What I will tell you is that for folks that have done design and construction outside the federal sector, a lot of this reads like what you might find in a municipality, in which they adopt a building code, in this case the IBC, and then they go through and they discuss kind of section by section the exceptions or changes. And so that's what the remainder of this particular UFC covers. So let's go back, and then I will see what other questions we have. Oh, thanks, Anil. Anil actually answered the specs and TAC question, and we'll look at the specs here in a moment. Go back one more, and now I'll get into my what if drill about this mythical project we're going to get involved in. So let's say the RFP that came out or the request for proposal said, hey, we'd like to put together a aircraft engine maintenance shop, and it's a design build contract, and it's for the Air Force. Okay, so the first question the organization might have is, well, what are the requirements? And of course, the RFP should list those out, and they'll have a number of references in there. But I'll show you how to navigate this page to get through a couple of things that might get you started in the right direction. So in the middle of this chart, you'll see where it has status active, and then it has series, and it's a pull-down menu. Go up a little bit. I'm sorry, Gracie. Right there in the gray bar, it's a pull-down menu that says series and any. A little bit higher up, right there. Yep. So you pull down the one that says any, and it's going to give you a choice of different things. And so farther down at the bottom, you'll see that there's some multidisciplinary and facility-specific designs. So let's say an aircraft maintenance shop would fit under that one that says the 4-200. Go down to where it says maintenance and production facilities, and then hit apply. So this is a nice search feature because it allows you to go down and say, well, what types of facilities are out there that already have UFCs that govern them? So do we see one that talks about Air Force Fighter Engine Maintenance Facility? There it is. So third one down from where you are there. Yeah, it says Air Force Fighter Engine Maintenance Facility. So once again, you've got a PDF here that you could pull up, and this would give you the standards that would be relevant to assembling a design build proposal for an Air Force Fighter Engine Maintenance Facility. If you open the PDF, I'll just orient you to what kind of information it has. And I believe the DoD's done a good job in these types of products trying to avoid being overly prescriptive, but stating what is necessary. And so what you'll see in this particular document as you go down a little bit is you'll see that it gives you some functional layouts. It gives you some opportunities to understand the kind of the bubble diagram of the facility and what types of requirements are in the facility. And that's a good starting point, and it's also a good ending point because it means that as an RFP comes together or a design comes together that's in compliance with this document, it's fundamentally meeting the intent of what the service is looking for. So you scroll down a little bit further, you'll get into where it shows some of these notional layouts for a notional site design. And then a little further, you got the bubble diagram. I think they even have a 3D isometric in a minute. If you keep going down, that kind of gives you a layout of how it might look. Yeah, so space planning factors, etc. Neat. So let's go back one and then see what other facilities were listed in that category. And what you'll notice is, yep, go back one more. What you'll notice is that it's not necessarily all inclusive. And so there are facilities for which there are very specific UFCs out there, but there's a lot that aren't. And so that would be an indicator to you that if it doesn't exist as a facility-specific UFC, you'll fall back on the standard UFCs that are in place for components. So let's go back to that gray bar that you pulled down, Gracie, and let's pull down the one that says Architecture and Interior Design. It's 3-100. And I'll show you another example of our RFP here. So let's say, for example, on this project, we're going to put in our proposal, but we've got a great deal with a major subcontractor or maybe another partner of our prime contractor that does roofing. And we'd like to really integrate their expertise in this project. So open up the roofing one as either that or the PDF. So this gives you the orientation. And I'll show you some search features here. So if you go to this as a PDF, you typically would have a search button that allows you to view it. Do you have that available, Gracie? I know I did when I looked at it as a
Yeah,
PDF
yeah.
outside of Teams.
I see this here, but I don't
Yeah.
have an actual little spyglass.
Okay. So I was able to when I open it in PDF. Maybe this is a Teamsism, but the reason I mentioned that is that you know, you can put in a word search, for example, and be able to say what would I like to find. Okay, so put in the word.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that's find on page. I don't. Well, we can try it.
Okay, we'll put in the word prohibited, and let's see what it finds. There it is. It's working.
Okay.
So what's interesting here is that you could do a word search of, well, what can I do or what can't I do? And this is a real-time example. I don't think the contractor's on the call with us today, but we had a we had a project that went all the way through a contract award, I believe, and when the basis of design came forward with the details of what they're going to put in for roofing, they had a roofing system that was actually prohibited by the UFC, and they were quite upset. And we were, you know, we were understanding that they were upset, but the UFC was quite explicit. And so I just give an example to where you can put in something like a word search for something you'd like to look for. And in that case, this would go through and tell you what specifically can't be used for roofing systems. You could certainly pick any other word that you wanted to and look at it. So let's go back and look at where it talks about insulated metal panel roofing as an example in that UFC. It should be listed in the appendix where you can do it as a word search. Ironically, that is the type of system that this particular contractor had intended to use on a building for which they found out they couldn't after award, and that created some consternation on their part, but we ultimately worked through it by having a different system provided.
Did you say insulated what?
Metal panel. There you go. So there's a whole section on it on page 34. And so this gives an example of how it's evolutionary. So at the time, and this was probably 6 years ago, the UFC had altogether banned that roofing system. There had been enough issues with them on facilities that they were not allowed. Now, since then, it is being allowed. I think if you go to page 34, it'll talk about it. Yep, there you go, insulated metal panels. Yeah, so now it is allowed, but it gives some caveats as to the lap joints and maximum type of spacings that can be utilized. And so, you know, I guess this provides some insight that it's not a static product. Something in the performance led to it being disallowed at one time. No doubt there was some feedback from the industry saying, hey, this should be allowed, but maybe there's something that addresses the performance concerns. That was adopted, picked up, and put in the UFC. So let's go back and show you how this traces through not just the UFC as a guidance criteria, but also the specs. So if you go back a page, Gracie, and we'll go, we'll kind of get out of the UFCs and go up to the unified guide specs. So keep going back.
Go all the way back.
Yeah, keep going back a little further. I'll tell you when we're there. A little further back. And further. Yep, keep going. There we go. So now when you come down to the very top one, this is Unified Facility Guide Specifications. There was a question earlier about how this ties into Specs Intact. So Specs Intact is a specs processing system, and I'm not an expert at this, and Neil is, and he can probably help me in the chat room. But the fundamental specification in terms of the guidance document, it comes out of this source. And there's two different formats of how it's presented. It's presented as a PDF or as a zip. And I believe within the zip is the version, I tried to download it, I believe that's the version that is the Specs Intact editable. So to answer the question that Mark put out there earlier, the two are integrated in the fact that the UFGS specification is this product you're looking at. The editable version is what is then worked in Specs Intact. And so this gives an idea of how the specs are laid out. If you go to the division, that's the pull down bar that says division any, a little bit higher up, it's in the gray bar again. Yeah, and so you can just go to roofing if you'd like to, for example. I think it's actually in thermal and moisture barriers. It's right there. And just to carry forth that example we talked about on metal panel roofing, you know, this is the area that you'd be able to find what they utilize for the for that type of roofing system. I'm trying to read the screen as I look at it with you. I should have pulled this one up earlier. As I recall, it's actually called something a little bit different in here than it was in the UFC. There it is, metal roof panels. You go down to the bottom. And just to orient to these, and this is getting pretty far in the weeds about specifications development, that again, I tend to be on the receiving end of specs, much less so than the developing end of specs. But one thing to recognize is that within the UFGS, there are editable and not editable features of the specs, and they're quite clear in terms of how they use this bracketing and explanation to the specs writers as to what's editable. One other lesson learned we had in a past project was a submission for an RFP that utilized a set of homegrown specifications for a DoD project, and that led to some additional angst and consternation as they realized that, hey, you know, there's a standard set of specs out there that we utilize. So let's go back and then we'll kind of park on that page and see what questions might be out there, and see if there's anything that comes up in the chat or the orientation to this. And I know, Jeff, when we presented this in the coordination committee, you had some aha moments. Maybe there's something you can share about how this this might be helpful to the industry.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly, Mark. I really honestly wasn't too in tune on this until you had brought it up. And so I think that's one of the key reasons why we wanted to add it here. There's so much information. It's really interesting to see where a lot of this stuff comes from. And you navigating us through this has opened up, I know, a lot of our eyes out here in the contracting community.
Okay, no, appreciate that. It's it is, you know, it's an interesting thing in my life as a member of the Corps of Engineers. I also serve as an Air Force reservist, and that's interesting to be in two different services at the same time, kind of, sort of, different statuses. But I think we have recognized that regardless of which service you work in or federal agency, chemistry, physics, thermodynamics, gravity, they seem to work the same regardless of what service you're in. And so it's refreshing to see a product like this out there that recognizes that, you know, a standard set of guides relative to the UFC, a standard set of specifications. And I think it really does help the industry, you know, be able to navigate those in a way that is transparent and available. And as I mentioned, is also editable to the extent that if there's a change requested, it can be considered and incorporated.
Hey, Mark, is there a process for the government auditing how to ensure that the agencies are following the guide as it's stipulated or laid out? Is there any checks and balances in that effort?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure there's some variability that can occur in the system. To a certain extent, it's it's a little bit self-fulfilling, and so from the standpoint of the Unified Facility Guide specifications, that is the platform that's utilized for our in-house designs or how we utilize our oversight of AE contracts, and so that provides a foundation of consistency. There's also processes we use internally to the Corps, and I'm sure other services do too, which are kind of self-checks, be it management reviews or what they call design construction evaluations, where we double check to make sure we're following these standards. It is an education process, though. Unless someone's keeping up with the UFCs constantly, you don't know what's changed and when it changed. Now, fortunately, the platform does just, it has the current version listed, so you don't have to worry too much about the changes in that the current one is there. But there is always the need to be conscious of when did an RFP go out, what was the UFC or the UFGS that was prevalent at the time, and then holding the contractor or the industry to that standard, not the standard that may have come out 3 weeks later, or a month later or 5 years later. So that is one aspect of keeping up with it. Hopefully that answers the question, Jeff, but if not, let me know.
Thank you. I know it's a complex question, so.
I think we're in a better place now than we were when we had individual service specs, because we have one place we can all look as a community to find that common answer.
All right, that's great. And I think with that, thank you very much, Mark. I think we'll move on to our next agenda item. And just so that everyone knows, if you've been trying to access those documents in the chat, some people are having trouble downloading those PDFs. We will share as much as we can via email as well during the meeting, so you can look for that. But don't worry, we will follow up with everyone with a full set of meeting materials via email afterwards, after the meeting. Everything that we are presenting is going to be presented on the screen, so you shouldn't miss anything today. So up next, we have our panel segment to bring you up to date with federal COVID-19 guidance. Our panel is, once again, Mark Slominski from USACE. We also have Justin Nodolf from NAVFAC. Justin currently serves as the Director of Construction at the Design and Construction Business Line for Naval Facilities Engineering Command, NAVFAC Northwest, a position he has held since September 2018. He is responsible for regional program management of construction services and related technical support, resource management, and ensuring implementation of policies and process to accomplish the primary mission of NAVFAC. We also have Dan Galvan. He is the current branch chief for the project management within the Design Construction Division of GSA Region 10. He currently serves in the region. He arrived in the region on July 2020 after transferring from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Previous to GSA, Dan was the division chief for facilities management and construction in Indian Affairs and is based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Prior to his retirement in 2016, he served as a commissioned engineer officer in the U.S. Army. And finally, our own Mandi Kime, who needs no introduction, as many of you know her well. However, for the sake of formality, Mandi is a Central Washington University alumnus of the Safety and Health Management Program and serves as the Director of Safety for AGC of Washington. She has a bachelor's degree in foreign language and teaches Spanish for supervisors in the construction industry and is currently pursuing her master's degree in safety and health management. Mandi has worked for the AGC Safety Department for over 18 years and helping employers with safety programs, including training, inspection, legislation, and regulatory issues. So with that, we will start off the panel with Mandi to set the stage with a brief overview of the COVID-19 health and safety response at the state level. Mandi, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, the COVID response at the state level, I think that we can all say, there was a shifting landscape over the first several weeks and even through to today, as far as what the expectations are for employers attempting to perform work and also keep their people safe. So I wanted to just remind everyone and reiterate that AGC of Washington created a COVID recovery safety resource landing page on our website where we put together all sorts of different resources that can be utilized for contractors, and we've made this available to all employers. This isn't just holding it close to the vest for AGC, but the intention was truly, how do we create resources that the whole industry can use, A, because it's the right thing to do, and B, because it helps connect everyone into doing the same sorts of things. So there's some continuity throughout the industry in what's being performed. So we looked to not only the Department of Labor and Industries, but Washington State's Department of Health, as well as the CDC, to kind of guide the work that was done here. And so I can put the web address there in the chat feature here in a few minutes. But all of those resources are still available, from job site safety practices to exposure prevention and preparedness to a site-specific work plan, as well as symptom screening. So those are all still available and still relevant. There's a few things that have kind of shifted throughout the months of us managing this. But I would be really remiss in talking about COVID and the impacts to COVID in the workplace if I didn't address the fact that the construction industry is already one of the highest rates of suicide in comparison to national averages. We're about 4 times national average for suicide rate, and it's important for us to not only take time to talk about people's health, their physical health and their protection from COVID, but also the mental and emotional toll that all of this management of COVID and lifestyle changes that we've all had to endure, what those impacts have on our human resources. So there are also resources through AGC on our website to tackle some of those conversations and offer resources. And we are working with the Construction Center of Excellence to offer a webinar on healthy coping and personal resilience skills and how to lead through, lead through adversity. When you're facing adversity, how to be a solid leader, but also how to be a good steward of yourself and take care of yourself in that process as well. So just want to kind of loop that into the conversation because it is important. And we are already seeing an increase in mental health challenges due to what's gone on with COVID. So with that, I will open it up to the rest of the amazing panel that we have here today and let them share their input as well.
Thank you, Mandy. So we will go back to Mark, Justin, and Dan to introduce the federal guidance.
Sounds good, Sonia. So I can kick it off and then certainly open to Justin and Dan providing some feedback too. And I appreciate Mandy's discussion there as well as Jordan talking from the national level. I'd start with just an expression of thanks to the industry and the contractor community. COVID has been a pretty difficult thing, I think, for everyone to work through, and an unforeseen circumstance for us all to deal with. And I think it's been pretty remarkable to see how the community gathered together, owners, contractors, all and groups like AGC that are kind of facilitators to be able to understand the landscape and to be able to adapt safety procedures and to be able to maintain progress in a safe way. Speaking specific to Seattle District, I think we have less than 10 projects that have officially noted some sort of COVID impacts. That's pretty remarkable because we're seeing anywhere around 100 plus construction contracts at a given time. And so in putting this together, I'll cover a little bit of what's come out from USACE and then turn it over to Justin and Dan to talk through what NAVFAC and GSA are seeing. And Gracie, do we have that one kind of flow chart available that we're going to put up? Okay, so as Jordan mentioned, there's been a developing guidance documents that have come out to different agencies, and we had a chance to look at the most recent one that USACE has put out. It was dated earlier in September, and it looks like it's generally similar to what other agencies are utilizing. So we just want to use this as a talking point for discussion or chat, and then perspectives from our other agency partners. And so I guess as a starting point, what we're seeing in the guidance, and I'll start off by saying that I'm a person that's kind of on the receiving end of the guidance. We administer the contracts. We don't necessarily form the guidance, but we're given some left and right boundaries as to how to implement it. The guidance, from my viewpoints, come out in kind of one of two directions that things go. If there is a directed change to performance, then down a specific path or allowances for paths of REAs and consideration. If there was not a directed change to performance, then it pretty much falls into the realm relative to an unforeseen act of God kind of situation, in which if there was a critical path impact, it can be considered for a non-compensable but excusable delay. And the vast majority of what at least we've encountered has fallen into that category, less so the ones in which there was a directed change. And so this flowchart kind of dialogues that as you go through, and you start in the upper left, and it starts off with was the contractor impacted. And I realize this is going to be a challenge for about anyone to read, but I think it's a product that Sonia and her team can send out to folks. And what this is guidance that came out to USACE, and I understand is similar to what other agencies are following for how to handle a COVID-related impact concern. And so then as the flowchart works its way through, if there's no impact, no further action. If there is, then it gets into discussion about, was an REA submitted? And if so, what's the format of it? Is it time only? If it's not time only, what path might it take? I would highlight that the CARES Act, as Jordan mentioned earlier, is on here, and that's recognized as one direction that something can go if if it fits in the boundary of what the CARES Act was intended to support. The process can look a little convoluted, but at least there's a process out there that's now being promulgated and relatively well understood. As I flow back to my opening comments, we fortunately have seen relatively few, and the ones that have come in have largely been in the context of, there was not a directed change. Most of the federal contracts already had provisions in place that said if you have prevailing local, state, federal recommendations for an emerging issue, then you need to comply with those. But we have been able to evaluate if there was a critical path impact, and if so, consider whether or not there's a excusable but non-compensable situation. And then as you kind of work your way through this product, view it and understand it, and then that may help you understand what is the reasonable timeline and the number of organizations or hands that get involved in this to help address what could be an impact that's seen. And so as this is still up on the screen, Justin, if you're online and had any specifics for what you're seeing in NAVFAC or any variances to what the process is, then I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, at NAVFAC, like I said, I just want to first and foremost say thank you to the contractor community. When COVID first struck here within Washington, there was a lot of uncertainty and confusion moving forward. Fortunately enough, we were issued out some guidance to allow all of our construction contracts to remain at a mission essential status, which allowed for access onto the base to continue construction, especially when a lot of the other public agencies were shutting down throughout Washington state. Currently, right now, we're still operating under those similar kind of conditions, working through temperature checks and working with self-assessment questionnaires for at least access onto the base, and then down to the actual more operational areas, actually having more check. So what does that mean is direct impacts that we've actually seen within NAVFAC itself have been pretty isolated. We have had a few cases where specific subcontractors would either have to do a restriction of movement and potentially not be able to come onto site. Similar to what Jordan had highlighted earlier, those may qualify for some kind of funding under a CARES Act. However, what we're also seeing too is there seems to be a lot of open communication with our contracting officers and our contractors on site, which I think is been a great relationship moving forward. And so, I'd say with direct impacts, Mark has been able to provide us at least a rough flow chart of the general process. We do have something very similar internally within NAVFAC for handling these. And what I'd say is continue working with your contracting officers for any direct impacts with COVID-19, and they'll help guide you through that process there for submitting your request for equitable adjustment. With that, I'll transfer or switch over to Dan there for GSA.
Thank you, gentlemen. Very similar situation in GSA as with the Corps and with NAVFAC, that we're all navigating through the challenges of COVID on the on the public sector, very similar to the private sector. We have very much a similar assessment protocol of accessing CARES funds, evaluating requests for delay or potential requests for equitable adjustment in very much the same manner as laid out here by Mark. Primarily, we are seeing more time requests, but we are prepared for and assess those requests for monetary adjustment as they come through. Probably one of our biggest challenges has been, again, like every other facility, a restriction on our opportunity to travel and visit sites. We've reduced our travel down to mission essential only, which means for us, generally smaller groups going to the sites We're looking at some different technologies to support remote assessments, and we continue to be very flexible within the region and GSA overall in entertaining different strategies to reduce that physical footprint in the individual spaces, just to kind of do our responsible part. So if there are innovative ideas and approaches out there, we are certainly open to hearing those, whether they be addressed in pre-solicitation or in RFIs during the advertisement phases, of ideas that the general contractor community, AE firms, builders may have to better perform the duties and functions as we maximize our flexibility in the current period.
Hey, thanks, Dan and Justin. And as another plug for the DoD Coordination Committee, a lot of us, as we continue to understand the landscape of COVID, have said, well, what's next if it continues to be in place for a while? And so one of the initiatives the Coordination Committee has talked about is if this is going to continue to go for the foreseeable future through FY21, are there some draft provisions that could be put into contracts to address it? And still in initial formation thoughts there, but another plug, if anyone would like to participate in the DoD Coordination Committee, as an example of something we'll be tackling here soon to look at potential contract provisions, contract line items, et cetera, that could address this. So Sonia, I think that covers most of what we wanted to talk about, and Mandi, but if there's other questions or topics related to this, let us know.
Great, thank you so much. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send them into the chat box, and I'm quite sure that Mark, as long as he can be here, I know he has another commitment at 3 o'clock, and others will do their best to answer them. We will be getting you all these materials after the meeting as well. So during the next hour, we will be hearing from each of our federal agencies for information about upcoming projects. These presentations are 15 minutes each, so if you have questions or would like to know more about specific projects, we'll be posting the project handouts in the chat box after each speaker, although we've understood that those are a little bit hard to retrieve, so we'll be sending those out via email. We'll also be providing a full contact list of today's presenters for your networking and follow-up questions. Again, we'll send those out in an email to you. First, we have Justin Nodolf, back to the stage to present for NAVFAC Northwest. Then we will have Mark Snell presenting for the U.S. Coast Guard. Mr. Mark Snell currently serves as Deputy Chief Contracting Office for U.S. Coast Guard SILC Construction, FACC Level 3 Certified Contracting Officer. Mr. Snell has been with the Coast Guard for over 7 years and has an unlimited warrant. His previous duty stations include various contracting officer roles within Naval Facilities Engineering Command at Bangor, Washington, and in Naples, Italy. Then we turn to Mr. Dan Galvan, again, Branch Chief for GSA, and finish up with Anil Nisgargand for USACE. Anil is an electrical engineer with facilities design expertise. He currently heads the specifications preparation and engineering review group. He provides contract management support for military and civil works related architect engineer resources provided by consultants. With that, I will hand it over to Justin Nodolf to kick this off with the NAVFAC Northwest presentation. Justin?
All right, thanks, Sonia. I just want to say thanks again to AGC Washington here for putting this on. We appreciate all the help that you guys give us, both with the DoD Coordination Committee there, and then also with events such as this, where we can reach out to industry here and give you at least a forecast of what's coming on in the future. So NAVFAC Northwest, so our area of responsibility is geographically pretty large. We cover projects as far to the east as Minnesota and as far north up to Alaska. In total, we have 11 states within our area of responsibility and approximately 14 reserve centers for either Navy or Marine Corps through those various 11 states there. Most of our work, however, though, is typically focused within the Puget Sound region. And that includes our 4 main installations. which includes Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, includes Nav Station Everett, and also includes NAVMEG Indian Island and Naval Base Kitsap. Within Naval Base Kitsap, actually, Stacy, you want to switch back one slide real quick? There we go. Within Naval Base Kitsap, we have several other sites that falls within their jurisdiction, which would be Naval Base Kitsap Bangor, Bremerton, Newark Keyport, the Naval Hospital located at Bremerton, and then also the Manchester Fuel Depot down south there in Kitsap Peninsula. In general, for NAVFAC, we typically do anywhere between $350 to $400 million in construction in place or work in place per year. And we have on general about over $1 billion worth of contract within NAVFAC Northwest that's currently let out right now that's under execution. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So NAVFAC Northwest is a SysCom whose main duty is for building and maintaining the shoreside infrastructure and facilities. And with that, we support various commands located at the various installations that I just mentioned. These include not only the carrier strike groups, both at Naval Base Kitsap and at Naval Station Everett, but also the submarine groups, the development group, the subdevrons, and also the air wings located up at Whidbey Island. We also support BUMED, which is the hospital command there, which have facilities both located up in Whidbey and also down at the Naval Hospital there, as I mentioned previously, down in Bremerton. Next slide, please. So typically NAVFAC uses a broad spectrum of acquisition tools to meet their contracting needs. In general, we do quite a bit of set-asides for small businesses, but we also have several unrestricted full and open contracts that we let out, mainly for our larger actions that require a large group and which would require basically burning through most of our multiple award construction contracts or MAC capacity. We do have a lot of MAC contracts that we maintain, and we use those quite frequently. Our MAC contracts are typically anywhere between 5 to 6 offers are selected on those. And typically the task order ranges range up to about $50 million, depending on which set-aside group or unrestricted it is. We also maintain a full disciplines of indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, or IDIQ A&D contracts. This includes anything from disciplines such as civil structural to mechanical, electrical, and so forth. We also have IDIQ contracts that we maintain for typically our smaller construction projects. These are typically on our small MACs, ranging up to about a $5 million task order limit, to also our JOC or our job order contracts, which range up to task order amounts of about $1.5 million. Within NAVFAC Northwest, we also have several BOSS contracts or base operating support contracts. But for this call itself, I won't be talking about those. I'll be mainly just focusing just on the construction aspects. Stacy, go ahead and next slide, please. A&E contracting, we typically try to regionalize our contracts just to help provide local institution knowledge within the area. They're always IDIQ contracts and awarded at a task order level. We will have several set-aside A&E actions as well, and typically reserve those for more of our specialized services, such as commissioning efforts or other kind of highly specified type items that we're looking for. Stacy, next slide. So within our acquisition toolbox right now for the design tools, like I said before, we have a full suite of disciplines, which include marine waterfronts, architectural, civil structural, multidiscipline, petroleum oils and liquids, and facility planning. As you can see, we have several that are going to be upcoming here for resolicitation, which include both our architectural and civil. And one note of update on this one, actually, our multidiscipline was just awarded on September 30th to Rogers Lovelock Fritz, or RLF, based out of Orlando, Florida. We are working right now to basically increase our contract values up to $100 million, so we have sufficient capacity. So you'll see when those new solicitations come out at a higher dollar threshold than what we've been using in the past. Next slide. Within the construction toolbox that we have several MAC and JOC contracts that are open right now. Our JOC contract right now is currently held by Port Madison Enterprise Construction Corps. We anticipate resoliciting that in sometime in FY23. We currently have 2 contracts under solicitation right now. The first one is a combined of our Hub MAC and our VET MAC into a Hub VET MAC that's currently on the streets with a contract value of $240 million and task order ranges up to about $20 million. This one we anticipate awarding this year as we are moving into the need. So we should be seeing some action on that one here shortly. Additionally, we also have Marine Waterfront MAC solicitation underway as well, which also has a contract value up to $240 million with task order limits up to $50 million, and that's an unrestricted contract as well. Next slide. We're going to be issuing out a new solicitation here pretty soon for a Northwest Mega MAC. This is going to be currently right now we're anticipating a contract value up to about $490 million. That might go higher depending on the need, and we're still working through some of the plannings. And we're also working on increasing potentially the task order range up to a higher threshold to support future requirements as they are developing right now. The additional contract vehicle that will also be going out as well will be a new small MAC as well. And we should be seeing that solicitation within the next year to 2 years here with, as I said before, the increased contract capacity up to $240 million. Next slide. So within the MilCon arena for this year itself, currently we have P907, which is a transit protection system pier and maintenance facility, which is currently under solicitation right now. I believe our proposals are due November 10th. However, I strongly recommend going to Beta SAM for the latest updates on the solicitation here to make sure you've got the most accurate information moving forward. We also anticipate releasing an RFP here shortly for P856, which is the bulk storage tank phase 1 replacement. This was a RFP that actually we had issued out a draft RFP out to industry for comment. This was through the feedback that we received from AGC over the last year and a half through our industry engagement, as well as with the DoD community coordination committee there, to try to get more direct feedback in the RFPs to make sure it's biddable and help try to buy down some of the risk moving forward. So we should be seeing that one here released here shortly as well. We have 2 other MilCons that we're anticipating releasing this year. This will go through a MAC contract vehicle. One of them will be for a new reserve training center down in Portland, and the other one will be for a hangar expansion for the Growlers up at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Next slide. For FY21 special projects, we are currently under solicitation right now for renovating some bachelor enlisted quarters up at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Right now we're just pending funding for award of that contract. We will also be issuing out RFPs via our MAC vehicles for additional work at Explosive Handling Wharf 1 for pile replacements, along with preparing some culvert replacements along our railroad corridor that heads from Puget Sound Naval Shipyard down towards Shelton. This will be a multi-phase approach, so you'll see several of these come out via our MAC vehicle as well. We have some significant electrical improvements that we'll be conducting over at Substation 5, located at Naval Base Kitsap Bangor, as well as a continuation of seismic improvements at Building 431 down within the shipyard controlled industrial area. Next slide. For our special projects plan for FY22, we'll have more continuation of work within Naval Base Kitsap Bremerton. We will be, those will include significant utility infrastructure upgrades, both at Dry Dock 2 and Dry Dock 4, Dry Dock 5, and Dry Dock 6. We will also be doing some more continuation work on repairing railroad culverts, as well as replacing several bridges, as you can see in the list of projects below. Our intent is to use our MAC vehicles moving forward on these actions. Next slide. So if you have any questions regarding these projects, my contact information is up here, as well as contacting myself. I strongly encourage also contacting our small business rep as well for any opportunities and coordinating purposes. That's Mr. James Niles. His contact information is here. And of course, you can always go to our website as well for more information at www.navfac.navy.mil. And so like I said, Sonia, I appreciate you guys' opportunity. And I believe there's going to be another slide handout as well that also has a list of further projects for everyone's dispersal as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as a reminder, you'll get all of those handouts to you via email, so not to worry, and you'll get at least one copy of that before the end of the meeting, and then we will follow up as well in the days to come with a full set of meeting materials. So next we have Mark Snell. Mark?
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to present this afternoon, and Coast Guard certainly appreciates the contractor community and AGC Washington. Next slide, please. So just gonna give an overview of our organization and some of our key contract vehicles and some resources for you. Next slide, please. So this slide just encapsulates, represents a mission set. The Coast Guard has 11 statutory missions, so that gives kind of a synopsis of what a typical day in the Coast Guard is. Next slide, please. So, and then the shore plant is quite extensive across the country, and the portfolio is quite aging with a 43-year average building age. So next slide, please. So this is kind of how our contracting offices are embedded with civil engineering units and the facilities design and construction center with 8 unique locations across the country. And so CEU Oakland manages the District 13 procurements for AFC 43, and then FDNCC handles the MILCON equivalent execution across the country and beyond. Next slide, please. So this is our historical funding of PC&I. Again, this is MILCON equivalent, and we've had significant spikes with the recent hurricane supplemental. Next slide, please. And our principal contract vehicle is to execute the PCNI or MILCON equivalent is the National Multiple Award Construction Contract. And it's an unrestricted MAC with, it has 1.5 billion in capacity. But due to the hurricane supplementals and upcoming work, we're rapidly projected to move through that capacity. So we're already in the planning stages of competing the 3rd iteration of the NMAC, which again will be a multi-billion-dollar multiple award construction contract. Next slide, please. So these are some highlights of some task orders we'll be looking to execute in the NMAC, kind of on the West Coast and Alaska. Next slide, please. And then our AFC 43 program is our depot level maintenance, and that's across the country, and it's typically around a $200 million budget. But our CEUs execute this program. Next slide, please. So again, this is kind of a summary of the AFC 43 program. We leverage our regional multiple award construction contracts, which roughly outline the district boundaries and our various small business set-asides. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a map of how our RMACs are set up in the various small business set-asides. Next slide, please. And then these are some highlights. Again, these projects and the previous projects will be highlighted in the project worksheets that you'll receive distribution to. But these are AFC 43 program projects that are above $1 million for the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. And these are the ones being executed by CU Juneau in the state of Alaska. Next slide, please. We also have a DH-wide general national A&E IDIQ, and that's a 10-year contract that was awarded in 2017 with $150 million capacity. Next slide, please. Also, okay, yeah, and this is kind of the list of firms on that contract. Next slide, please. Of note, on the national A&E, we also have a small business reserve. And then we have an environmental engineering Coast Guard wide contract that also has a small business reserve. Next slide, please. And then we're in the process of negotiating the rates for our Coast Guard Ocean A&E contract, and a District 1 A&E, which is the New England area. A draft synopsis is under development. Next slide, please. Finally, this site, which is the acquisition planning forecast system for the Department of Homeland Security, lists all our requirements above the simplified acquisition threshold, or 250K. They've also made some recent updates and improvements to the site. Next slide, please. Finally, these are points of contact. The COCO is located in Norfolk. I'm the deputy COCO located in Seattle. And these other point of contacts are Norfolk and Seattle for FD&CC that do our MILCON execution. Next slide, please. And these are our senior field contracting the various civil engineering units. Next slide. And that's it. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of the points of contact. I'm happy to engage and address any of your questions. And thank you for the time to present today.
Thank you very much, Mark. Back to my. Okay, and so now we have Dan Galvan back on the stage to give his update.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and want to say thank you for the invitation here from the AGC. As a new arrival to Regional 10, I may not have all the answers, but I know we are very committed to partnering with with the various contractors out there. And joining me today is actually one of our supervisory contract officers, Amy. So if in the course of this presentation, we actually get into a little more depth or the questions on there, we do have her with us that can help answer some of the questions that we might have. I'll try to go forward with this a little quickly and provide a brief overview, and then kind of close out. And very similar to what we've heard before, I believe there's a handout that talks a little bit more about the 3-year plan and some of the larger projects we have. So thank you for moving that forward. This is what our footprint looks like within Region 10. We are in Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Our work within Alaska is primarily focused in the southern regions, be it the Ketchikan Peninsula, Anchorage, and Juneau area, with a very modest amount of work up in the Fairbanks area. We also have some land ports of entries, but again, most of those are focused in the southern areas. Probably not a large area of work for some of the contractors here, but if you're interested in expanding out to Alaska or looking at some of those work, there is opportunity there within the GSA. And then you can see some of our major centers of operation within Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, but we have a variety of different offices around the region. Okay. So this is what we look like within the region. We support approximately 12 million citizens across the 817,000 square miles. We do that with a modest 465 GSA full-time employees. And again, like many federal agencies, we work through contractors. So at any given time, we estimate about 3,200 contractors, supporting us from the facility management perspective, or working on construction projects, or just the full range of services that GSA offers. All told, we are supporting about 100,000 federal employees throughout those 4 states we just mentioned. So it's significant. How do we do this? Within GSA, we do this with 2 primary arms. We have the Federal Acquisition Service, and then the portion that I work within, the Public Building Service. We'll spend a little more time talking on the PBS side, but the Federal Acquisition Service, that's some of the basic goods and commodities that people may be more familiar with. Overall, we're the purchaser for the federal government. We do this through multiple award schedules programs. You see our fantastic cars rolling all over the street with those GSA plates on it. And one of the key notes about the acquisition service is that it is a national program. So a lot of that work is done nationally through large scale contracts, and of course a small footprint found out within the regions. That program on the federal acquisition side is funded by vendor sales. And then you've probably had a chance to look off to the left and see a little more of the other face that we have within GSA, which is that landlord of the government operating out in the regions, providing that support to our different clients and the public. Next slide, please. And speaking about our clients, these are our clients. It is highly likely this is not the full list, but we like putting it up to say that we take our obligation very seriously, and we are very committed to providing that superior service to our customers, be it any agency in the federal government. And we also partner very closely with owners of various buildings to provide those solutions for the clients that you see here. Next slide. Skipping back a little bit to talk about the Federal Acquisition Service. People are familiar with it. That's a lot of in-house work of providing solutions to our clients. But potential note to participants here from AGC is that red underlined portion of the professional services. That is an avenue on the fast side where AE firms, GC firms could potentially see advertisements out and submit bids for those. Go to our next slide, please. A little more information about what that professional services schedule it is. In this past year, GSA made the strategic decision to consolidate previous contract solutions into a singular contract vehicle. That is worth about $10 billion annually within overall GSA. And we did this to, of course, realize some cost savings. So we consolidated those 7 schedules into that singular professional services schedule, thereby reducing contract duplication, reducing some of our direct workload, and the associated burdens of negotiating, administrating multiple contracts. All told, at the end of the day, we realized a cost savings of just short of $4 million for taxpayers. Moving back to the little more traditional public building service, what do? We manage the owned and leased federal real estate portfolio. We seek to provide superior workplaces for our customer agencies and provide superior value to the American taxpayer. We do that through the Design and Construction Division, which I'm a member of, implementation of our environmental programs. We serve as the facility managers of our own buildings and provide the facilities management support for that. We manage both our own properties as well as lease properties. And in doing so, we have to have a foot in the historic preservation world. And at any given time in any one of these areas, we are looking to innovate within the workplace. GSA spends a considerable amount of time and energy looking at those unique opportunities, trying to look at different perspectives to deliver more value to our clients at a savings to the government, and trying to have our ear to the grindstone out there of that public sector, private sector innovation that's in place. And if you recall from the previous section, the plug of, we do want to hear your ideas. We are open to the ideas. A lot of that lifting is not necessarily done within our 10, Region 10 on the workplace innovation, but our central office is robust and energetic in doing that. So our door is open to those ideas. Next slide, please. Okay. A little more nuanced view of how we look within the region. We have 508 properties, approximately 15 million square feet. Space-wise, it's split just about evenly between owned and leased, but you see a large difference between the amount of leased units, that's, leased from private owners, versus the 102 federally owned units out there. A lot of that 102 properties are historic in nature, and they're spread across the 4 states we support. Overall, on our lease program, we generate approximately $192 million annually in rental payments to private building owners, and either through rent or improvements. Of note, we support the land ports of entry for the Customs and Border Patrol, and we have our 16 border stations spread through Washington, Idaho, and Alaska. We at any given time have several different projects ongoing, and we have one project in particular at in Blaine that is in the phase 2 evaluation. Our biggest customers within Region 10 are the judiciary, followed by the Department of Justice, and then support to Homeland Security, Department of Interior, and the Department of Energy. Next, please. Next slide, please. Can't tell if I'm frozen.
You're frozen,
okay, I'm sorry. If you can go back to the areas of focus. So I think that's one slide back.
There it is, areas of focus.
Thank you. What matters to us in GSA? Well, what matters to us in GSA is, again, delivering that best value to the government and the taxpayer. We want to make our clients happy, but we also realize we are stewards of public money, so we're looking to get that best value. We recognize we're an economic catalyst, placing that money into the private building owners, whether it's tenant improvements, lease payments. So that is important to us. We have a very, very steadfast commitment to utilization of the small businesses. We also want to look at the total workplace, again, trying to drive those innovative solutions to deliver for our clients. And especially important here in the Northwest, we do look to sustainability. We want to implement those best practices, be they from USGBC, be they from Energy Star, any of the different varieties of how we can get a more efficient and effective operating workspace. Next slide. I'll spend the next two portions here, primarily on this slide, kind of tuning our horn about how much work we do in GSA with the small business. Nationally, looking across those 2 business lines, we did 15,000 contract actions to small business solely in support of the COVID response. The full range of purchases from masks to hand sanitizer to, larger tenant improvements to, anything that you can name that GSA provides. We made that commitment to using small businesses. Of that group, 20% of those awards went to socioeconomic disadvantaged businesses at a total value of over $43 million just for that subset. Overall, we spent about $2.3 billion to the larger group, and we have increased regional goals coming in the upcoming fiscal year. Locally within R10, across all of our business lines, we directed about $61 million to small businesses, and that accounted for 67, almost 70% of our entire budget. So again, a very significant and very committed, very large commitment that we have within Region 10 to small businesses. It's not that we don't like the larger businesses and the full and open competition that comes with them. So a lot of our work tends to be on the smaller scale, but in larger volumes, and that gives us an opportunity to to work with small businesses and help them develop their, their own capacity for larger competitions. Overall, within the region, we're very proud of this. We have exceeded all of our fiscal year 20 goals, and sometimes by many, percentages. This slide here, I won't spend a lot of time on. Everyone has probably already marked it down that FedBizOps is gone and Beta SAM is the way to go. So if you're looking for small business opportunities, these links will take you there. Next slide. We're not all small business within Region 10. We do have a modest capital construction program. We'll get into that and we'll share just a small portion of that. But our capital construction program does give us the ability to take design build, look at the best value. We of course work through the traditional design bid build method. And recently we gained the authorization to use CMAR CMC as a delivery tool. We have about a half dozen capital projects ongoing, whether it's exterior renovations of the Seattle Federal Building, the land port of entry up in Blaine that I was just mentioning. There's some upcoming work that's in development down in Portland, and then some significant work at Tacoma Union Station coming up. In preparation for all of this, we go through a series of several studies and assessments in order to do that. So you may see several solicitations for upcoming work that tap into AE firms, try to pick up construction management assistant firms as we finally build up to that design and construction, that execution phase of our work. Next slide, please. So here, not meant to be, in duplication of the handout that you have, but this is a somewhat sorted list of our, that's a pretty broad range there, but about our $500,000 to over the $30 million cost range of upcoming work. And it would invite any of those on, on this call, if you're interested, to keep an eye out for these projects as they hit in the upcoming year. Some may be wondering why the final item on there is highlighted. That is the Tacoma Union Station seismic retrofit and repair project that we do not yet have the funding for. However, once we get past the CR and receive the final congressional authorization, we're expecting that project, those funds to be provided in about $40 million to do the retrofit and perform the repairs at that. And preceding that, we plan to put out for a study to help us better coordinate and maximize the funds that the government has appropriated for that project. Next slide, please. The next several slides are just going through our primary, delivery vehicles that we seek to leverage. So we have a MATOC for small projects with those primary offers there, total contract value, and that period of performance will take us through next fiscal year, or the current fiscal year, excuse me. We have a similar one for Western Washington that takes us through fiscal year 23. Next slide. We also have a southern region small projects. Our south is generally defined by Vancouver, and then it takes on the obviously the Portland area and potentially extends south down into the Medford area, supporting the GSA sites that we have in those locales. Because Alaska is a unique area for us, we do have one for small projects. Again, that total contract value is $25 million, so it is a lot of small work, primarily directed to the firms that you see there. But we also have some significant larger projects there, so there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of work that we actually have planned and execute in Alaska. Next slide, please. Fulfilling that historic preservation responsibility we have, focused on those 102 buildings that most of them are historic status. We have a historic preservation IDIQ that gives us great flexibility, and we recently used this to do some of the protest cleanup, both at the Hatfield Courthouse and I believe up in the Seattle Courthouse that you may have seen in the news. So it's a great tool that we seek to leverage. Next slide, please. So same here. We have one for some of those very, very small projects, looking at the repair and alterations of less than $50,000. So as needed, we access this as well. And again, we do a significant amount of work at the, below the simplified acquisition threshold. Next slide. Upcoming contracts that we have in development within Region 10 is the AE IDIQ. Those evaluations are still pending review, and we are on track to make that award to those firms in the first quarter of fiscal year 22. That will be the typical 1 year plus four option years to execute. And the geographic area will be region-wide for that IDIQ contract. Some may be looking at that. There's also the national IDIQs out there, but I'm not seeking to address those. But if you have questions, we can definitely support that. Our next item is the job order contracts, which are on target to be awarded in Q1. We are looking to select one vendor for each one of those zones, and those discussions and evaluations are ongoing. And again, looking to make that award here in the very near future. So areas Eastern Washington, Western Oregon, and then Western Washington to include our land ports of entry. And then my second to last slide here before we open up for any questions is just another plug, getting back to that commitment to the small businesses. That's our point of contact information for our Office of Small Business Utilization. All right, next slide. Thank you for your time, and apologies, Amy. When I first developed this, yeah, Heather was on the block, so I put her on there. I'll open it up for here for any questions or clarifications.
All right, it doesn't look like there are any immediate questions, but if you do have some or think of something, go ahead and send those over in the chat box. Next, we have Anil with us from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Anil?
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Greetings from Corps of Engineers, engineering side of the house in Seattle. Mark Slominski is our Chief of Construction, and we are the other side of the of this business. About 200 of us in engineering. Package these solicitations from planning charrettes all the way to solicitations, and then once we award those go to Mark, and he takes over execution of the construction. So to start with, I don't have a map of my slides, but I can just quickly cover what we do here in Seattle. Our military boundary for the Seattle district is all the way to Montana, and Washington. So Washington, Idaho, Montana, and also actually Oregon, where we do all the military construction, primarily, of course, Army and Air Force, but there could be work for the Guards, National Guards, and reserves once in a while. On the civil work side, we have our boundary is Washington State. Primarily, we do all the flood control levees, upgrades, partner with the locals for other activities on the civil work side. And we have our operations division where we handle several dams. We have flood control dams on the west side, and Mark will be talking about one of those. And on the east side, east of the Cascades, we have Chief Joseph Dam, and we have Libby Dam in Montana and Albany Falls Dam in Idaho. So these dams, we are mostly doing upgrades on the hydroelectric dams on the east side. We do upgrades to cranes and mostly other the upgrade to the gates on the dams, things of that nature, mostly O&M work. Then we also serve other agencies. We are a multi-mission district. We serve the besides the services, military services, we also work for the EPA, And lately, we've been doing a lot of work for the Veterans Administration. Those are our key major customers. And then we do other construction for smaller offices, such as guards and reserves. Plus, once in a while, we also do some work for the Navy installations. So that's kind of the nature of our work. And now going into, well, before I go to this year's presentation, maybe I can mention that last year, which had just actually finished on 30 September, we awarded up to $150 million worth of construction. JBLM had most of it, and then some work at Fairchild Air Force Base. This year, now we will have a little bit of a lower order of magnitude awards. So this presentation is more about multi-year. And so the first year, FY21, which is right now, we really have only one major project in JBLM. That's retail fuel facilities. These are basically fuel stations, basically gas stations for military vehicles, non-tactical and tactical vehicles. So we have two of those. One is in the main Port Louis base. The other one is in the North JBLM. They're both similar. Each one has about 4 above ground tanks, about 30,000 gallon fuel tanks. There are 8 dispensers for F24 fuel. I think it's kerosene. There are 2 dispensers for diesel fuel, and there is 2 for gasoline. There will also be a 1,200 square foot control building. There will be a truck offloading point for the fuel brought in. So those are the 2 projects we have. They could be advertised as one combined project, depending on the timing of the money available. So anyway, that's one of those are the main for sure project we have this year. For future years, for the following year, FY22, we will have an ambulatory care center design, which is will be a design build award, and basically it's a clinic for soldiers. It will include physical therapy areas, behavioral care. There will be laboratories and patient exam areas. And as you see, the dollar values are listed there, up to $25 million project. That will be packaged in-house this year for award at the end of fiscal year 21 and for construction the following year. Then we have a couple of Special Operations Forces projects. One is a rigging facility. It's called Consolidated Rigging Facility. Basically, it's for parachute repair, drying, packing, and storage of parachutes. It's about 100,000 square foot facility. Interesting thing is it includes a 4,000 square foot drying tower, which is will be about 75 feet tall, and it can accommodate up to 200 parachutes. There will be about 140 Fahrenheit air movement to dry the parachutes over a period of time. So it's an interesting project. And only thing, it won't be under construction at least FY23. It will be full design. Sometimes the special operations projects can be advanced easier than the other Army projects, so it could come in sooner than later. The next project is also for special operations. That's called a Tactical Equipment Maintenance Facility. This is basically a vehicle maintenance facility for repairs, changing oils, things of that nature. It's a pretty large 12,000 square foot structure. It has a 6 bays for maintaining, and there will be administrative areas, tool storage, offices, things of that nature. So one part of the building is kind of high structured, probably 25 feet high to 35 feet high bays, and then the other is more regular office building. So that's again a fairly large project. It's a fully designed in-house project. Also, FY23, right now we have a definite project. That's the UEPH, which is barracks. And it's a 150-person barracks. We have standard design for the barracks in the Army. And so we'll be using the standard design. The thing that changes mostly climate type stuff for the Seattle Northwest area. And of course, there was some site work and connections to the utilities and things of that nature. The building will be about 60,000 square feet, 2 to 3 story structure. So we're just starting the preliminary work in-house for this. And we're looking forward to completing that design by next year and ready for award, I guess, FY23. So those are the major projects in the Seattle area for the Army. We do cover Yakima as part of our Army program, but there are no scheduled projects, major projects right now there. So moving on to the next one. Next slide is a combination of Air Force projects. These are not in the Seattle area, so many of you contractors who might be local may not be interested that much in these, but it is for us, this is major work. The first one is actually the title had changed now for some time. It's called Weapons Storage and Maintenance Facility. It's just some technicality considering the programming of the project. But basically, it's a very large facility, as you can see, $200 million to $250 million. It's for nuclear weapons storage and maintenance. Basically, it's consolidating various buildings at the Malmstrom Air Force Base. It's a highly challenging design work, as you can see, because of the nature of the weapons stored there. And so it's been taking us and our design consultants some time to design based on changing criteria, decisions on the criteria, things of that nature. Basically, it's a concrete, these are concrete structures covered with earth, basically igloos, and there will be some offices and other related activity there. So that's not going to be ready for award till after next year, sometime late next year, and construction after that. The next project is a flight simulator. It's an add alter. So we're adding to existing flight simulator building at Fairchild Air Force Base. This was just advertised actually, and then we were not able to go through the entire process of award for programming reasons. But now we are going to advertise it again. Hopefully it will be out in next month or so for award, first quarter of this year, this fiscal year, which is by December. Many of you probably have seen the details. We also, so that's basically the Fairchild program. Then the other two projects listed there are kind of in the future. We don't have definite details on that. Water treatment plant and pumping plant at Mountain Home Air Force Base. The base is currently supplied by water, underground water, and this is to bring some water from Snake River onto the plant, onto the base, and then treat the water. So we will have some pilot plant first designed and awarded, but that's all still programming It is going to happen, but it's maybe 22, 23 timeframe. The next project is a Child Development Center. Again, it's very new. We're just going to start doing some planning on it. I don't have all the details, and we don't expect it to be till the year 23. Next slide, please. Next slide is, let's see. Am I coming out? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, the slide looks like frozen, so let me look it up on my screen here.
We're on Seattle District Veterans Affairs.
Okay, yeah, I don't see that on my screen. Okay, that's good. So since our Army program in Western Washington is slow this year, or not too many things happening, but we do have a very robust Veterans Administration program, although it's spread over next 2-3 years. So the immediate one this fiscal year, will be advertising this building 207 project, which is, as you can see, it's between $75 to $100 million project. It's a new building, new structure, 2-story structure, housing, a clinic, ambulatory care, exam rooms, lab. Basically, it's a medical facility, and it's about 60,000 square feet or so. It is at the American Lake Complex near Tacoma. And it's been in design for many years by the Veterans Administration, and now we have taken it over for advertising and award. But right now we're doing some changes to the plans, final checking, reviewing. But that will be a substantial project for our staff and, of course, the construction community. To follow on with that, we have 2 years of additional projects at the VA location, same location. We have Building 81, which is an existing 30 to 40-year-old building. It will be completely renovated for medical facilities, and it's under seismic upgrade program. But it will have other things such as HVAC upgrade and floor plan upgrade, all the medical needs. So it is more than seismic upgrades. We are still to start designing that. And then we also have some other buildings which will be upgraded under the O&M program. So we do have several, a couple of $100 million worth of work for the VA in this area for the next 2-3 years. So that's our major work. The next slide covers the civil works and other miscellaneous work we do, which is substantial. Like I mentioned, we work on the dams, and we have several crane upgrade projects. These dams are 30, 40-year-old, and we're upgrading the cranes there. We also do dredging around here. We had just awarded 5 different dredging projects in FY 20, so we will have similar activity coming up. And then we also have work for EPA. This project is a work-off on Bainbridge Island. We'll be building some cutoff wall for some Superfund site, still under design. And so it will take some time to be out in construction. More recently, we're also taking on work for the Department of Agriculture. And most upcoming project actually is at Pullman, Washington, at the university. There'll be an upgrade to, not upgrade, but there'll be a new building for basically research, agricultural research. It's a substantially large project, design, build, award around FY22. We're still working on, just started designing that project. There will be another project at Corvallis, University of Oregon. There will be some large greenhouse design that will be in a similar time frame. It all depends on the programming of funds. We have worked with that department extensively, so it's a learning curve for all of us involved in that project. And the last one mentioned there is Albany Falls Dam. We're going to do a fish passage there as well. We have construction going on at Mud Mountain Dam, which Mark is going to talk about. But we do have one coming up, not as big as this one, but a good sized project in Albany Falls, Idaho. So those are our civil works projects. There's also one other thing we have not listed here. It's listed there actually. It's a JBLM SRM projects. These are more O&M funded projects. I don't always get a good handle on that workload because we have a separate group who handles those projects, but they do award a substantial amount of projects up to $50–60 million every year. And so that will be happening FY21 as well. So that's kind of pretty much covers the Seattle District Corps of Engineers projects for the next few years. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Anil.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, thank you. So if you have any other questions for Anil on those USACE projects, go ahead and continue the chat. And again, we will be delivering out all those handouts to you shortly. So now we'll move on to our final segment of the meeting, our federal project highlights. Before we introduce the 2021 Banger project,
I'm starting now.
We thought it would be interesting for everyone to get a follow-up on the presentation on Kiewit's Mud Mountain Dam, which was presented during construction at last year's meeting. Hear from Kiewit to walk us through what it took to finish this fascinating and complex job is Ben Musaid. Ben has worked as a project engineer and superintendent for Kiewit since graduating in 2007. Welcome, Ben.
Welcome, or thank you. Hey, I appreciate everybody's time today. I want to give you guys an update on the Mud Mountain Dam project. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Want to start off with a project overview, kind of get into a little bit of the fascinating history of the facility, and then talk about the 3 phases of construction, and then open it up for questions if there are any. Next slide. There's lots of stakeholders in the Mud Mountain Dam project. Obviously, there's lots of environmental and other folks that are involved in the job, and then there's the 3 tribes that are involved with the CWA with their water rights. Next slide. So a lot of focus on the project. We also wanted to highlight where it is. It's in Buckley, Washington. Next slide. It's along the White River, which is fed out of the glaciers from Mount Rainier. Next slide. And back in about 1910, they built a bypass dam or diversion dam to start funneling water and create lake taps. That was part of the White River Power Plant project. Next slide. The region had been experiencing pretty dramatic flooding, and so they had in 1936, Congress authorized the Flood Control Act, and one of the projects that was selected was building the Mud Mountain Dam project. Next slide. That was at the time the nation's largest earthen dam, but it presented a very unique challenge. There was no way to build a conventional fish passage facility. Next slide. So the Corps of Engineers was able to brainstorm what's been known as the Buckley Fish Trap. This is a facility that traps and hauls fish, and they haul them about 5 miles upriver of the Mud Mountain Dam where they're released and they can continue on to spawn. This has kind of become the staple for trap and haul facilities. Next slide. Since 1947, when the facility was opened, the Corps of Engineers has been operating it and hauling fish 24/7, 365. So every day since then. Next slide. You can see the existing facility when we showed up for construction. Had the existing fish barrier, which is that same timber diversion dam structure that's been there since 1910. It has the existing trap and loadout facility, and then it's located right next to the Muckleshoot hatchery. Next slide. The Corps was challenged to do better, and they've really risen to that challenge. This is the new facility design. It's the largest of its kind in the nation. It's the first of its kind. It features some automated sorting capabilities instead of having to touch every fish like they do now. And then they project it'll have about a 2 billion fish capacity annually. Next slide. Now I want to jump into what's going on on site right now. So in phase 1, we had diverted the river, and then we constructed the first portion of the barrier. Next slide. Sorry, it's not hot. There we go. So by July of 2018, we had built our cofferdam out and started construction on that barrier structure. Next slide. By May of 2019, we had substantially completed that barrier structure. And if you look really closely in this photo, you can see we were maintaining that fish trap and haul facility the entire time. So going right through our cofferdam the whole time was this fish care and diversion, in addition to the care for the water there. Next slide. Over the Memorial Day holiday in 2019, we flipped the river. That's started off by breaching our downstream levee. Next slide. That allowed the lower works to flood. Then we breached our upper levee. Next slide. And over the course of that weekend, we were able to breach both those, get water flowing over the new facility, and then build a levee out and water to that. Next slide. Now I want to talk about phase 2, which kicked off right after that weekend river flip. The primary activities here were building out the new facility and our startup and commissioning, which we're right in the heat of right now. Next slide. This is what the project looked like in January of 2020. So between the beginning of June 2019 and January 2020, we substantially finished the foundations portion of the project. Next slide. By June of 2020, we had substantially finished the walls on the project and constructed the majority of the future trap and haul facility. You can kind of see that off to the left there. Next slide. And here we are. This is from a few weeks ago, and we are right in the swing of commissioning. We have water flowing through the facility right now. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about phase 3. That was mentioned that's coming up. So this is the first of its kind facility. There's a 1-year trial period before we get from our existing facility to full operation on the new facility. Once that is done, it'll kick off reconstructing that water take for the Taps Lake and the CWA. Major activity there is going to be care and diversion of that water while we're constructing, and then all of the CWA improvements. Next slide. You can see here I've highlighted on the top there the existing facility, and you can kind of see how the water comes in under that. That's a wood truss structure, and then goes through the 2 bulkhead gates. And at the end of phase 3, they'll have a brand new water sluiceway through there to help manage their sediment. And we'll have completely reconstructed the intake gates and given them a much more comprehensive water management and bulkhead system. Next slide. Any questions? I haven't seen anything pop up in chat yet. All right. Well, Sonia, I'll turn it back over to you. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. That was really, really interesting. Really interesting. Thanks so much. And so now to introduce the 2021 Bangor P834 project is Jeff Arvizo again. Jeff's been a nice contributor to this meeting today. Thank you, Jeff. You heard from him earlier, but I'll introduce him again. Senior Vice President and Chief Engineer for Manson Construction. He graduated from the University of Washington and has accumulated 32 years of construction experience, 28 in marine and heavy civil, and 4 years in mechanical and HVAC. He has over 25 years of experience managing or executive oversight on federal DoD projects across the country. Including USACE, NAVFAC, and U.S. Coast Guard. Welcome, Jeff.
All right, thank you, Sonia, and congratulations to Kime and Corps on how far you've come along on the Mud Mountain Dam project. It's echo what Sonia said. It's a pretty neat project. Why don't you go ahead and advance the slide, Stacy, please? Is it? There we go. Yeah, so, just carrying on the tradition of what we want to try to do in talking about these projects is just try to highlight some of the larger projects that have been awarded. In this case here, we're talking about the P834 Seawolf class submarine service pier extension project at Naval Base Kitsap Bangor. Talk about some of the project details. Justin will cover how we went through the solicitation and procurement process. And then I'll give you an update on some of the details on where we're at on the project. So again, this project is located over at Naval Base Kitsap Bangor. You saw the scope of territory that Justin had covered on his previous slides. But this project is being administered and is a NAVFAC Northwest project. Manson Construction, we are the contractor. The designer on the project is WSP. They are actually the NAVFAC's engineer for the project. The awarded value was just a hair under $90 million, and it was awarded earlier this year back in February. And we do have about 2.5 years to complete the project, 866 calendar days. Next slide, please. So this rendering that is popping up here, at least it's not shown up, there it is. I'll go through some more details on the project as we go along, but this rendering does give you a fairly good idea how the Navy will be utilizing this new pier out at Bangor when we are completed. Next slide.
All right, Jeff, there is a delay when I switch. I switch when you say it, but it takes a bit.
No problem. Yeah, I'll just wait for it to pop up on my screen there. So like many federal projects, of course, there's just numerous FAR clauses that we all have to be looking at and are part of our contracts. Just two key ones to be pointing out here is the first off, the Buy American clause. So we are under 225-11 construction materials under the trade agreement. And then for, of course, a number of people on the line here, our 219-9 small business subcontracting. And so wanted to point out that on this project, we have on this $90 million job, we have committed over $35 million in planned small business subcontractor participation. Next slide. So to give you an idea on what this looks like, some of our key subcontract partners that are working with us on this project, you can see on this slide here, to get to that $35 million, so it takes a great participation from that group. 6 of the top 10 subcontracted dollars that or partners that you see here on this list are small businesses. Next slide. We're really happy to have that level of contribution to the community. So what's the overall mission of this new pier? There are a lot of really interesting things happen out at MBK Bangor. Obviously, mostly committed to the submarine warfare systems for the Navy. In this case, out at Bangor and the Sub-Devron group that services that, these Seawolf class submarines, in this case, the USS Jimmy Carter, but they do have other planned uses for other Seawolf class submarines that will be visiting the area or home port at the facility. So pretty exciting to see what's how they utilize the pier and the submarines that are stationed there. Next slide, please. So I'll cover some project details. Go ahead, Stacy, next slide. So a little more detail to cover here. This really is broken up into two parts. Besides the pier that we are constructing, we also have a large upland parking lot that has well over 300 stalls. And it also has some capability for storage for a variety of reasons to support this new pier. To make way for the new pier, we have to do some demolition on some existing structures that are out at the existing facility. And then that'll allows us to build this new 520-foot submarine berthing pier. It is pile supported, as you would imagine, mostly 36-inch diameter steel piles. In addition to that, a number of utilities, including pure water, that's to be able to hook up that pure water to the submarines as they are berthed alongside the pier. And then, of course, the normal plumbing, compressed air, oh, there we go, and then electrical, which includes electrical substations. To accommodate the submarines as they come in, though, and deal with the tide cycles, there are two very large concrete mooring camels that are part of this project, and much like little pontoons in themselves, concrete technology is fabricating those in Tacoma, and we will tow those up to the site and get them fixed into position when they're complete. You also see on this picture a crane. That is a 25-ton fixed pedestal-mounted crane that will be installed on this project. Rather unusual for a NAVFAC project to have a crane like this as part of the construction contract, and certainly have a lot of things to get sorted out there in terms of getting that installed. There's also a small compressor building, about 2,000 square foot on the dock, and then some other items like a small craft float, a wave screen, and some fendering systems. Next slide, please. So to give you an idea where we're situated here at MBK Bangor off of Hood Canal, not too far off from Seattle. There are a couple ferry rides or a long trip around the south through Tacoma. Next slide, please. When you dive in or getting in closer into MBK Bangor, there are a number of key facilities that are part of the mission out there. The explosive handling wharfs, marginal, Delta, and then KB, and then that star represents where the service pier is located. Of course, a lot of other things happen out at MBK Bangor, including all the weapons storage for all the munitions. Go ahead, Stacy, next slide. And now looking even closer, so the existing facility out there at Service Pier is shown there. The Subdevron facilities are behind that up there on the land, and then over on the right-hand side, you can see that blue area, that shading area, that's where the parking lot is being installed. And then Justin had mentioned this other P907 project that ties in proximity to that project. Next slide, please. So this is the solicitation process. Justin, if you are available, give you a slide here to go through some of the details on the solicitation.
Sure, Jeff. I appreciate it. So P834 was solicited via FedBizOps. It had been out there for a while. Of course, this project itself was a design bid build project. Typically, large projects like this with a very high level of complexity and detail required, and a lot of internal coordination there with the various stakeholders on the projects will typically go that route. So we can make sure we've got the right solution there before we actually start engaging with the construction community there for bidding purposes. The RFP itself was a best value RFP, just a single phase. Sometimes our contracts, we will actually do a multi-phase, whether it's a design build type avenue to do a short list of qualified bidders, or if we know we're going to have a significant level of interest, we might do a two-stage or two-phase approach just to reduce down the pool of best candidates there to help expedite the process moving forward. This contract itself went out as an unrestricted, full and open. It was two-part proposals. The first part was a technical proposal, which had 5 factors. This is pretty consistent with our bidding processes, which would include sub-factors such as experience, past performance, safety, some kind of technical solution, typically pertaining directly to the RFP and contract requirements. And then, of course, because this was a full and open there, we also included small business utilization goals and their plan just to make sure that they're going to be complying with the FAR and federal requirements. And of course, the second part of the proposal itself was also the price proposal. And I believe this one, I think, was equally weighted. And with that, actually, I'll turn it back over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. One other thing to add to that is that this project has actually been solicited a number of times, finally, of course, being awarded to us, Manson, back in February, but it's been a number of years through various rounds, just some funding or issues in getting everything dialed in terms of the funding stream has been really took a while for the project to get up and running. Okay, next slide, please. We'll finish this off with the progress update. I'll show you some photos and details of where we're at. As I mentioned at the start, an upland component is a big part of this. That includes this parking lot. A lot of the site work has now been completed. We're in the process of getting, of course, with the winter weather coming on, getting the site stabilized for the winter weather that is going to be approaching us here very shortly. Go ahead, next slide, please. And as part of that retaining wall structure, some of the actual structural work for retention ponds, those kinds of stormwater structures are ongoing at this time, as well as some topsoil work, trying to get the site balanced out and deal with the material that's on site right now. Next slide. So then, as we move out of or start getting into the actual construction, the first real part is the demolition. In order to, because it ties into the existing service pier, there are some items that have to be removed, including the existing timber wave screen. And there's a small pier extension that had to be removed. Next slide. So here, showing our Derrick 24. This was in order to get these bigger sections out, utilizing a bigger crane, wire sawing, pile cutting to be able to take these big sections out, and certainly try to minimize the amount of work that occurs on site, and of course environmental considerations. Next slide. And then as those larger concrete sections are removed, extracting the existing piles with a vibratory hammer. Those piles are then loaded onto a barge or move off site, where we deal with the disposal and proper removal of the materials. Next slide. So now, as we get the demolition done, moving into the pile driving, which allows the rest of the pier to be constructed. One of the very interesting things, or one of the big challenges of this project, is the amount of the constraints that were imposed upon the project regarding from the permits. Number of blow counts per day, of course the in-water work restrictions that are pretty well are set for the time periods that we can work in the water. That includes removal of piles and then in the installation of new piles. Also stipulates the type of pile driving hammers that we can use. And then there are other factors that come into play, including mammal monitoring, observation of the environmental critters that are in and about the area, and other mitigating measures. Next slide. So as part of that, there are porpoises, harbor seals, and other mammals that have to be considered. And there are other, which creates exclusion zones. So when we're impacting piles or vibratory piles, if a mammal does come within that range or that bubble, the pile driving operations are affected by those critters that are in and around the area, in around the pile driving area. Next slide, please. So as we start driving the piles and having to deal with differences between the vibratory hammers and the impact hammers, does certainly create some challenges for getting the equipment set up to be able to do that. And pile driving has advanced. We are proceeding down the line with the driving, and have had a number of times where the harbor seals who are habituated in the area are around and have affected the pile driving times. Go ahead, next slide, please. And then is very common in the Puget Sound area with impact pile driving is use of a bubble curtain. So essentially what that does is we have a rings that go down, encompass the pile, hooked up to air compressors, and then those bubbles do create or lessen the amount of hydroacoustic effect to the underwater fish and mammals. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we're still in the process of driving piles, which then leads to the construction of the pier. And so after the piles are driven, we put it in our false work and start constructing the pile caps. Next slide, please. And then after the dock, the pier is completed, or along the way, we commence with our pile driving and get the fender systems in place. Next slide. And then in addition to just normal pier construction, as I mentioned, there are a number of utilities that are at play here with mechanical, plumbing, air, fresh water, and pure water, as well as electrical. And here showing how we have to access some of the challenges of accessing, getting the utilities down from the land, down the existing trestle, and which would then allow it to be hooked up to the new pier that we construct. Next slide. And really, it's rather hard to show you what these camels look like or give you an appreciation how big they are. But the lower rendering shows you an idea what this pier looks like in a schematic view. Camels that are installed, again, those are precast concrete pontoons essentially that we tow out to the site, connect them to guide piles that we install. And then there are a series of brows and other devices that allow the crews to be able to work and access the submarines as they come in and berth alongside these new camels. Next slide. And that is it. Just trying to give you a good overview of what's one of these larger projects that's been awarded recently, and we'll hopefully have an update for you here at our next presentation next year. Thanks.
That's wonderful, Jeff. Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Okay, well, we'll just go on to the next slide. Just a reminder to not miss some events that are coming up. Particularly, we haven't talked about our contractor exchange coming up on November 19th. All of you may be familiar with that event. It's a sort of a round robin speed dating type of event where subcontractors can meet with GCs. Information has come out on that already, but turning to the October 21st, navigating federal government contracts. Stacy, if we could bring up that flyer, if that's possible. Before we adjourn, we would like to bring up Howard Roth from Olds, Morrison, Rinker, and Baker to talk about this conference. Howard has 30 years of experience handling federal procurement and contract law matters, and excited to bring this opportunity to AGC members. Howard, I'll give it to you.
Well, Sonia, thank you very much. I think the biggest thing about this annual seminar is that we bring in people from throughout the country who are experts. And, you know, we have, for instance, John Klein, who is, you know, the attorney at the Small Business Administration Procurement Law Division. and he's going to talk about these brand new 8A and SBA mentor protege rules, which is important to small businesses and their mentors, the larger businesses. We've also got all this supply chain under attack, if you will, with the CMMC and the having to essentially rip out your Chinese cameras and other information technology equipment, or not be able to bid on government contracts. So really impacting the supply chain. And then COVID-19, we've got Doug Oles, who is former president of the American College of Construction Lawyers, and he's going to talk about how you can get compensation for COVID-19 delays and impacts, which I think will be very interesting. And then up from San Francisco, we have Don Featherston to talk about what's near and dear to my heart, which is how do you resolve contract disputes? And they go over the anatomy of a dispute. And Judge Park Conroy, who's now retired, but I worked with her for many years at the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals, she'll give you a sort of a judge's insight into how these disputes are resolved. And really the best thing to do is to do it through alternate dispute resolution and to stay away from the courts and the boards. As everyone knows, that is a very time-consuming process. And then, of course, we'll have Jim Nagel with his year in review. And this is a 1-hour presentation. Jim is well known for this year in review. He gives it throughout the country. He's also the co-author of Administration of Government Contracts, which every government contracting officer has on their desk. When is this? It's going to be in the morning of the 21st of October and the morning of the 22nd. It has to be virtual. It's the world that we live in now. There is a nominal fee of $25, and you can register at the PNDC website. And we have up here on the slide a very detailed web address, but you can also do it. I have to do it like on the people who sell on TV, and it's got to be www.pndc.us. That's www.pndc.us. If you have any questions, you can also contact me at roth@oles.com. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that we will have the one and only Adam Lasky, who I've worked with for many years at Olds Morrison. And he's going to talk about, how do you put together a teaming agreement and a subcontract for a federal project? What are the pitfalls and what are the keys to making it successful? And I think that also is a very interesting topic. Now, I love government contracts, so I think these are all interesting topics. And I know that not everyone can attend all the sessions, but the nice thing is, with it being virtual, is you can look at one or two, and maybe someone else from your organization can tune in for the others. And then there's some great materials that are always handed out. So this was a wonderful seminar today. I know I got a lot out of it, and appreciate everyone's presentation. And I know that your organization will benefit from what we have on the 21st and the 22nd. And again, it's a national group of people that we've brought in from throughout the country.
Thank you very much, Howard, for sharing that. And with that, I would like to thank everyone who presented for taking your time to share your information and expertise with the group. And thank you to all of the people who attended. I am very happy to report that if you go to your meeting notice for this meeting, you will find all the handouts, all the project lists, as well as this flyer for this, and a contact sheet for all the presenters with all their contact information. And if there's anything that you feel you need, please be sure to email me. And we will be also distributing a video of this meeting sometime early next week when the system kicks it out for us and we have it all prepared. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we're right on time. I really thank everybody for all their hard work. Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great program.
Thank you, Howard.